Ay çok şeker bir tadıymış. Ay ben böyle de artık gezmeyeyim ortalıkta. Bir dakika.
Oh, success. It worked.
Yes, perfect.
Anyhow, I'm very happy to be here with you all, a small and select company. And thank you very, very much for the invitation, even though I can't be there physically. At least I'm with you in spirit, and I hope to visit Ankara in real life someday. My talk will be mostly about the interpretation of Macedonian painting connected to the afterlife and the use of images by the Macedonians on funerary monuments. Monumental painting was one of the major arts of the ancient Greek world. We hear about it and about the great painters of antiquity from the literary sources. Unfortunately, those masterpieces have perished because they were painted on wooden panels. By a stroke of luck, echoes of some of these works have come down to us in the past half century, thanks to the excavations of underground chamber tombs of the late 4th and the 3rd centuries BC in Macedonia. The finest Macedonian tombs are decorated with wall paintings of very high quality, either on the facades or inside the burial chambers or both. And now I'm trying to change the image. Okay. Macedonian tombs can be schist tombs, which are built of ashlar masonry and are accessible only from the roof. For example, Tomb 2 in Vergina. Or they can be underground chamber tombs covered with a barrel vault and embellished with a monumental facade, which imitates a propylon. Barrel vaulted tombs are called Macedonian tombs, and are usually accessible through an outdoor corridor and a marble door. Because these tombs were occasionally used for many family burials, the doors were both decorative and functional and could be opened. Most Macedonian tombs were covered with artificial mounds. We do not know if their facades remained visible and for how long. However, a few of the pictorial motifs which are represented in some inaccessible tombs of Hellenistic Macedonia were adapted in wall paintings or mosaics of Roman Italy. This indicates the existence of a prototype somewhere on the Greek mainland, from where it came to Macedonia, and later it arrived in the Roman world. In addition, the high quality of Macedonian wall paintings suggests that they were created by accomplished artists who did not learn their trade on the spot, but they were invited to work in Macedonia from established artistic centers. You will notice that I do not use the word frescoes because Macedonian wall paintings are not frescoes. They are painted in egg tempera, so it's not a word that we should use. In this talk, we discuss the context of a small selection of Macedonian wall paintings. And we begin with two examples originating in different contexts and adapted by the Macedonians for their art, for their funerary art. The rape of Persephone at the top of the screen is borrowed from the religious repertoire of Greek sanctuaries. And at the bottom of the screen, the coronation of the victor derives from athletic or civic dedications. So none of those were originally made for tombs. We will next discuss the reading of sacred texts in preparation for the afterlife, a theme that was first developed in Athenian funerary art, and we will conclude with the judgment of souls in the underworld, a concept that was explained by Plato, but not illustrated in Athenian art. It was illustrated in Macedonian art. The heyday of Macedonian painting coincides with the reigns of Alexander the Great and his successors between 336 and 280 BC, when painting was dominated by the school of Athens, which was headed by Nicomachus, Aristides, and Nakias, and by the school of Rhodes, which was headed by Apelles. These artists were responsible for a number of innovations, like cast shadows, but continued to deploy their compositions in a shallow field. Apelles and Nicomachus in particular practiced the so-called four-color palette of white, black, red, and yellow, and their combinations. Nicomachus made a name for himself by developing a technique of rapid execution, which implies a quasi-impressionistic style. Panel painters who painted only on wood were traditionally employed by sanctuaries or cities to embellish sacred or civic buildings, meaning temples and stores. Their subject matter were gods and heroes, battle pieces, and portraits. The patronage of the Macedonians introduced a change of direction, for these artists were now called upon to decorate palaces and private houses, and by extension, the last houses of the elite underground chamber tombs. It is interesting to compare and contrast the funerary iconography of the Macedonians, as it was expressed in their wall paintings, with the funerary iconography of the Athenians as expressed in the grave reliefs. Athenian grave reliefs of the classical period tend to represent secular scenes like family gatherings or battle scenes. And yet the Athenians were deeply devout, but you wouldn't know that from the reliefs. A large proportion of the population of Athens was initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries, which promised a blissful afterlife. So they really did it for the life after death. But do we get any glimpses of their privileged status as initiates in their grave reliefs? Do their memorials project any eschatological overtones? No. The Athenians were generally very discreet about involvement in mystery cults. We see no divine figures on their funerary monuments, with the exception of Hermes, who is sometimes shown leading the deceased on their journey to the underworld. The Lekithos of Myrine in the Athens National Museum, which is attributed to a priestess of Athena Nike, and in fact the very first priestess of Athena Nike, is a classic example of the privileged dead escorted by Hermes. We assume this is happening because she's a priestess, she's not just any mortal. But scenes related to mystery cults were usually reserved for temples. A famous panel painting of the rape of Persephone, attributed to the Athenian painter Nicomachus, was much admired in the Roman period and was eventually taken to Rome and dedicated on the Capitoline Hill. It is very likely that this panel originally stood in the sanctuary of Demeter and Kore in Eleusis, and we see here a Roman copy, perhaps dependent on this original painting. The Persephone theme, which in the rest of Greece was deemed appropriate only for sanctuaries, was adapted to serve a funerary function in Macedonia. The earliest surviving example, which is also the earliest funerary mural from Macedonia, was painted on one of the walls of a Sis tomb in Vergina, dated to the 3rd quarter of the 4th century. This tomb is known as the Persephone tomb or Vergina tomb 1, and is located between tomb 2 or so-called Philip's tomb and an overground Hieron. 3 of the walls of the Persephone tomb carry murals painted on 3 layers of colored stucco. One wall is decorated with the abduction of Persephone that you see here, and the other 2 walls show her mother, Demeter, and the 3 fates on the right. Unfortunately, half of the screen is hidden by ourselves. I don't know how to show more of the screen.
You can click on the top screen speaker view. I think that you can make us to disappear.
I don't know how. Let me try. No, it's worse. No, sorry, I don't know how to do that.
Next to your slide, there is a 2 small line. If you click on this line and push them to the right, we shall disappear. If you move your arrow, you will see on the right side of your picture, there are 2 small lines.
Yes.
So
okay, we are all disappearing.
Okay, good.
Success, thank you. Okay, we stopped with the 3 fates that you can see here on this drawing. In the main scene of the Persephone tomb, we see Pluto riding a 4-horse chariot and carrying a resisting Persephone. Her companion, who is left behind, crouches in amazement, while Hermes leads the chariot, with the thunderbolt of Zeus crashing before him to indicate the god's approval. The thunderbolt is up here, not very visible on this screen. The warm, glowing colors of the painting are a result of the artist's choice of a restricted palette of reds and yellows, which are mixed in a variety of ways. It recalls the traditional 4-color technique, which was practiced by both Nicomachus of Athens and Apelles of Rhodes. The extensive use of incised outlines, some being enhanced by hatching, is unusual in Macedonian wall paintings and indicates the presence of an artist from Greece who was invited to execute a special commission and is not seen in Macedonia again because this painting is unique. The iconography of the abduction of a woman on a chariot is familiar from a late 5th century relief from Athens on the left, showing the abduction of the heroine Iasili by the hero Aeschylus, their chariot being led by Hermes. But it is not going to the underworld because the chariot is going uphill. This relief was dedicated to the shrine of Kiphisos in Phaleron. The composition actually reflects wedding scenes in Attic vase painting, where the bride and the groom ride a chariot to the bridegroom's house. In an Attic Lutrophoros in Berlin on the right, we see the bridegroom carrying his bride to the chariot here, while the charioteer steadies the horses and the parents of the groom are waiting at the entrance of the house. So the rape of Persephone can be understood as part of a wedding ritual, although the bride is not exactly willing. but the metaphysical overtones of the imagery in this tomb are clear. The soul of the departed, represented by Persephone, married to the king of Hades himself, is led by Hermes to a privileged position in the afterlife. A composition originating as a dedication in a temple is here adapted by the Macedonians into an allegory of salvation after death. There are no Eleusinian mysteries in Macedonia, and we do not know where and how were the Macedonians initiated into mystery cults. But unlike the Athenians, they obviously had no constraints in using mystic imagery in their graves. It has been argued that the rape of Persephone in the Persephone tomb is a reflection of the famous panel painting of the Athenian Nicomachos and was probably executed by a member of his workshop that was invited from Athens to Macedonia. The adaptation of this theme for funerary purposes was taken up by a rather inferior floor mosaic decorating the second chamber of the Casta tomb at Amphipolis. The date of this tomb is disputed, but there is no doubt that this mosaic postdates the tomb of Persephone. The funerary function of the rape of Persephone is carried over to Imperial Rome, where we have two mosaic versions and one mural, and they are all from cemeteries. One mosaic is in the Roman cemetery underneath the Church of St. Peter's. And the mural comes from the tomb of the Nasoni in Rome and is now in the British Museum. The mosaics are rather close to the Vergina variant. And these Macedonian tomb paintings could not have been accessible to artists in Imperial Rome. We can draw the conclusion that they are dependent on the prototype that inspired the Vergina painting, probably the panel of Nicomachos that was eventually removed to Rome. We now move to another motif which originated not in a funerary context, but was borrowed by the funerary iconography of the Macedonians. The facade of Bellatroom in Vergina, dated to the 3rd century BC, is decorated with a painting showing a warrior in the center being offered a wreath by a tall woman on the right and attended by a male figure sitting on a pile of shields on the left. Beyond the open door of the tomb, we can see a marble throne, its back painted on the wall. The tomb was excavated by Manolis Andronikos, but he died before he had a chance to publish it, so it's not really published. Before we discuss the scene on the tomb facade, let me say a few words about the coronation motif, which is not really a funerary motif. The award of a wreath was in fact invented in Greek art to illustrate honors given to victorious athletes. On the left, you see a drawing of a now lost late archaic Attic lykithos, illustrating an athlete's coronation here. In the 5th century, crowns came to symbolize civic and other honors, and towards the end of the Peloponnesian War, crowns were also awarded to victorious generals. After he defeated the Athenian fleet at Aegispotami, the Spartan general Lysander dedicated at Delphi a statue of himself being crowned by the god Poseidon. Attic record reliefs of the 4th century often carry coronation scenes, as this example on the right, which is now in the Athens Epigraphical Museum, It dates from 322 BC, and it shows Bully and Deimos crown Asclepiodoros, the ambassador of Phokis. In the Hellenistic period, the coronation motif is reserved for rulers, and we have many examples of kings being crowned by personifications. A classic example is the so-called porous decadrachm, which was minted by Alexander the Great in Babylon in 323. Here he is shown crowned by Nike. Going back to the facade of the tomb in Vergina, the Bellatroom, the dead person is represented as a warrior wearing boots, a cuirass decorated with a gorgonion, a short chiton, and a military cloak wrapped around his body. He holds an inverted spear in his right hand. His left hand is placed on his hip. His pose has been compared to that of Lysippus's portrait of Alexander the Great with a lance, which is reflected in a bronze statuette from Egypt, now in the Louvre. The warrior is frontal, but is flanked by two figures shown in profile who look directly at him. A tall woman on the right offers him a wreath. She is dressed in a chiton with short sleeves and seems to wear a Stephanie. A young man on the left, shown sitting on a pile of shields, wears a chiton with long sleeves and a himation wrapped around his lower body. One hand is supported by his sword and the other hand is extended forward. A round shield rests by his side. The shield device is a bird. This is usually described as an eagle, but despite the heavy weathering, I don't think it can be an eagle because we can still make out the round head and the symmetrically arranged wings, which help identify this bird as a siren. Sirens are very appropriate in a funerary context and were popular both in Athens and in Macedonia. The sarcophagus of the Belevi tomb near Ephesus on the right, dated to the 3rd century, is decorated with images of sirens. The pile of shields on which the young man sits can be understood as a trophy taken from the defeated enemy. We need only cite the famous statue of Etrulia personified, which was erected by the Aetolians in the sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi after the Aetolians defeated the invading Gauls in 279. Etrulia was shown seated on a pile of Gaulish arms, including shields, and this is attested by the surviving base of the monument, still in the sanctuary. The Aetolians placed this image on their coins in commemoration of their great victory. The image of the victor stepping on his opponent's shields reappears in the 2nd century BC, and we have two examples, one which still survives and the other lost. And they both involve Gaulish shields. On the right, you see a standing statue of Apollo from Delos, trampling Gaulish shields underfoot and dedicated after another victory against the Gauls. And second, the lost statue belonged to the last Attalid king of Pergamus, Attalus III. He returned home from a victorious military campaign against the Gauls. And the Pergamins had a statue erected in his honor, wearing a cuirass and stepping on the enemy's spoils, which we assume were Gaulish shields. The statue is documented by an inscription. If we look closely at the shields on which the young man sits, it becomes clear that they cannot be round hoplite shields. because the figure sits at some distance from the shield's edge, they are more likely to be oblong Gaulish shields. The identity of this man has been hotly debated. The god Ares, or a personification of war, or the eponymous hero of Macedon, or even Alexander the Great, have all been suggested. There are two features, however, that argue in favor of Alexander. The young man wears a Persian, long-sleeved chiton, which implies a mixed Greek and Persian costume, like the one adopted by Alexander after his defeat of Darius III. In addition, his profile, especially the hairstyle with anastole, his longish hair and depression for the addition of a diadem, matches other posthumous representations of Alexander the Great, especially the coin types of Lysimachus. Alexander, of course, did not fight against the Gauls. The Gaulish spoils can only belong to the warrior in the middle of the scene, who must have participated in the victorious battle against the Gauls near Lysimachia in 277, where Antigonus Gonatas drove the Gauls out of Macedonia and gained the throne for himself. Finally, the woman offering a wreath to the warrior may be either a personification, as has often been suggested, or a priestess, meeting a triumphant ruler at the city gates and offering him a golden crown, a ritual which is documented by several inscriptions and texts of the Hellenistic period. The exact date of this tomb, within the 3rd century, is unknown. The young age of the warrior does not need to reflect his appearance at the time of his death. His coronation may not signify posthumous heroization, as has been suggested, but may be explained as a memorial of honors to the victor of a military campaign that were bestowed on him in his lifetime. If we recognize the shields as Gaulish, then we are dealing with a commemoration of the Battle of Lysimachia in 277. And it is just possible that the scene on the facade of this tomb depends on a monument erected in honor of the victor. Although the Bellatroom is commonly attributed to a Macedonian general, it may well be that the presence of a posthumous portrait of Alexander the Great sitting on the spoils of war gained by the dead person is an allusion to royalty. A further token of royalty is the marble throne, which is situated inside the tomb. The victor against the Gauls, a liberator of Greece, Antigonus Gonatas, springs to the mind. Even though he defeated the Gauls in his youth and died in ripe old age, the memory of his great victory was kept alive, and this is attested by dedication of stelae documenting his triumph 30 years after the event in the Temple of Athena Nike in Athens. It is not impossible that the same victory was commemorated by a coronation scene on his grave. We finally move on to images related to the afterlife that are truly appropriate to funerary art. As we pointed out at the beginning of this talk, the mystery cults of Demeter and Kore and the mysteries of Dionysus promised their devotees a privileged position in Hades and prepared them for their journey to the underworld. The initiates had to study sacred texts which guided their steps and provided them with the correct answers to the questions posed by the judges of the underworld and the kings and queen of the underworld, Pluto and Persephone. Instructions on how to proceed have been found written on gold tablets and placed in graves in Macedonia, Thessaly, Crete, and Magna Graecia. And this is a gold leaf from a tomb in Impella. Although Aristophanes in his frogs was able to see the comic side of the solemn journey to the underworld and share it with the spectators of the theater of Dionysus in Athens, the visual arts of Athens avoided this topic until it found a niche in Macedonian tomb paintings. The funerary monument of the Athenian orator is Socrates, who died in 338, has not come down to us, but is described in the lives of the 10 orators. It consisted of a tall column supporting a siren, as well as of a marble trapeza showing a relief scene of Socrates and his teachers. Gorgias, the sophist, was specifically said to be gazing at a globe, with his pupil Socrates standing beside him. A comparable relief showing a gathering of men, although they do not hold any attributes, can be found on the base of a 4th century funerary vessel from Athens, which is now in the Acropolis Museum. More explicit is the relief frieze from the Hellenistic funerary monument of Hieronymus of Tlos from Rhodes, now in the Berlin Museum. The frieze stops at the left because we're missing a slab, but enough remains to see a gathering of men sitting on a semicircular exedra here. One man holds a book roll, while another points at a radius at a globe on the ground, down here. The next scene on the right shows Hermes introducing a dead man to Persephone and Pluto. There's Pluto and Persephone, and there's the dead man. Beyond Pluto, we see an underworld scene with the dead people sitting on rocks, attended by a winged woman, probably Psyche, the soul, and the personification of the earth, here, rising from the ground. Judging from the underworld scenes on the right half of this frieze, we can interpret the scene on the left, here, as a meeting of initiates of a mystery cult studying sacred texts in preparation for the afterlife. The globe may be understood as presenting the topography of the underworld, and this is explained in the pseudo-Platonic dialogue Axiochos. The theme of devotees reading from sacred texts, explored by Athenian art, was apparently transplanted into Macedonia. The so-called philosopher's tomb in Pella is a schist tomb excavated in 2001 and promptly published by its excavator, Maria Akamati. She interpreted the iconography of this tomb as a philosophical gathering. This tomb dates from the 3rd century BC and functioned as a family burial place because it contained the remains of a man, a woman, and a child. The 4 walls of the tomb are decorated with the main scene showing 6 or 7 men, sitting or standing, reading from book rolls, while one of them points at a globe. A narrow frieze at the top shows a horse race taking place in a cemetery, which is signposted by burial mounds topped by stelae. In one instance, we see a stele supporting a cinerary vessel, so very clearly a cemetery. There can be little doubt that what we see here are funeral games. Funeral games are documented in Macedonia by the literary sources, recording the history of Alexander the Great and his successors. They are also documented by a painted frieze showing a chariot race in the antechamber of Vergina, tomb 3. The west wall of the philosopher's tomb in Pella is dominated by a single figure, his left foot stepping on an elevation. He has no beard, he is wreathed with leaves and wears a red himation and boots. The lack of beard is no indication of young age, because we know that Alexander the Great had introduced the fashion of shaving one's chin. And this seems to have continued for a while in Macedonia, even after his death. The man in the red cloak points a radius at a blue globe resting on a box here. This figure is the earliest surviving example of someone pointing at a globe. We have already mentioned that Gorgias pointed at a globe in the funerary monument of Socrates, but this is lost to us. The north wall of the Bellatroom shows two men, but only one is well preserved. We see a bearded man sitting on a rock. He is wreathed and wears boots and a purple chiton and a yellowish himation. He reads from a book roll held open on his lap. Near his feet, we see two more book rolls. Another pair of men is shown on the south wall. A man wearing a wreath, a himation and boots sits frontally on the right. He has a short beard and sideburns, but no mustache. His companion is damaged, but we can make out a beardless man wearing a wreath, also sitting. The east wall preserves the remnants of a seated figure with a beard holding a staff. It is unclear whether a seventh figure was included. This scene seems to be inspired by a painting that is also known through two Roman mosaics. The better preserved mosaic from Pompeii is now in the Naples Museum. It is popularly known as the Seven Sages mosaic and depicts four old men sitting on a marble exedra, while another man stands behind the exedra and two more stand at either end. There's the one behind and the two standing. Some of these men hold book rolls, while the man at the center points at a globe placed inside a box. A half-open box, perhaps holding more book rolls, rests on the ground near the extreme left. Behind the man grows a tree, and this is flanked by a column topped by a sundial. There are also two pillars supporting an entablature on the left, and this entablature holds four bronze vessels. The shape of these vessels suggests that they are cinerary urns, by analogy with several examples known from Campanian wall paintings. On the left is a painting from Herculaneum showing a cinerary urn on top of a column in what is obviously a cemetery scene, because there is another column on the left. Two hens peck at a pomegranate in the foreground, another symbol of the underworld. Now the sundial also can be used as a symbol of transition to another world because it symbolizes the passing of time. It is therefore an appropriate image for a cemetery. The grave relief of Theodotus of Byzantium in the Istanbul Museum, dating from the 1st century BC, comprises both the globe, at which points the dead person, and the sundial, which is held up by a sphinx at the left end of the relief. At the top right of the mosaic navels, we see a landscape reminiscent of a walled city. It has been variously interpreted as the Athenian Acropolis, Acrocorinth, or the Nile Valley, and by implication, the gathering of the 7 men has been labeled Plato's Academy in Athens, the 7 sages in Corinth, or the Museum of Alexandria. However, we have here 2 items referring us to a cemetery, the cinerary urns and the sundial. The city in the background, I think, indicates that we have here a cemetery outside the city walls. I suggest that the mosaic derives from a funerary painting showing a gathering of initiates who discuss sacred texts related to the afterlife and studying the topography of the underworld on the globe. This painting may have also inspired the main scene of the tomb in Impella. As to how this painting became a popular subject for domestic decoration in Roman Italy, it may well be that the patrons actually thought that the scene depicted the 7 sages. The scene is at any rate rooted in Athenian funerary art. We conclude with a theme developed in Athenian literature, but not in the Athenian visual arts. It found its visual expression in Macedonia, and this theme is the judgment of souls in the underworld. We have seen how the initiates studied sacred texts in order to be able to answer the questions of the judges of the underworld and the gods of the underworld. Plato says that Rhadamanthys, Iacchos, and Minos were the judges of the underworld. Minos and Rhadamanthys tried the souls of those who died in Asia, while Iacchos tried those who died in Europe. Homer and Pindar inform us that the soul's ultimate goal was to reach the realm of Rhadamanthys, who presided over the Elysian fields. A poem written by Poseidipus, a native of Pella, expresses his wish to have his statue reading from a book roll erected in the Agora of Pella after his death, while he would take the initiate's path leading to Rhadamanthys. And another poet, Hegesippus, explains how the virtuous dead were led to Rhadamanthys by Hermes. Aristophanes, in his Frogs, gives us a humorous account of Dionysus' descent into the underworld. Before embarking on his trip, Dionysus consults Heracles, who had already been there and back. What he really wants to know is the locations of bars on the way. Dionysus finally arrives and knocks on the door of the underworld, disguised as Heracles, because he believes that the lion skin will ease his way in. The judge Iacchos answers the door. Who is it, he asks. The mighty Heracles, answers Dionysus. But he is met with incredible abuse, because Heracles had stolen Cerberus and forgot to bring it back. Dionysus did not follow the right guide because it was Hermes and not Heracles who led the souls to Hades. Unlike Dionysus, the Macedonians had done their homework. A judgment in the underworld is painted on 4 panels, flanking the entrance of the so-called Judgement tomb in Lefkadia. The tomb dates from about 300 BC and has a Doric facade with metopes and an Ionic frieze, as well as an Ionic upper order topped by a pediment. The painted metopies show a battle of Greeks and centaurs. A battle of Greeks and Persians is represented in a plaster relief frieze higher up. The facade gives the impression of an ornamental gateway, which of course here means the gate to Hades. Looking at the panels from left to right, we see a dead warrior introduced by Hermes, leader of the privileged souls, to the seated Aeacos, judge in charge of deaths in Europe. There's Aeacos. The standing Rhadamanthus closes the scene, signifying that the deceased has secured a blessed afterlife. The names of Aeacos and Rhadamanthus are painted on the panels, and that's how we can recognize them. The battle of Greeks and Persians, represented in the frieze, suggests that the tomb belonged to one of the companions of Alexander the Great, who survived the Asian campaign to die peacefully at home and reach the paradise of Rhadamanthus. Unluckily, the name of this person is not written on the panel. The gateway to Hades may also be taken as a warning to the visitor to the tomb. The same principle applies to the painting on the pediment over the entrance to the tomb of the Palmids, another 3rd century tomb in Lefkadia. Here is the pediment and here's a detail. Pluto and Persephone face the viewers as they try to make their way into the tomb. Pluto holds a large key, symbolizing his power to hold the dead perpetually in his kingdom. But perhaps the visitors have memorized the right answers and are headed for a blissful afterlife. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this very clear, documented presentation with new interpretations. So I would like to ask if we have questions. Maybe if you wish, Olga, we can stop sharing the screen.
Yes.
Thank you. So we are waiting for questions. You can take the floor or write in the chat as you wish.
Let's see if I can find the chat.
Yes, it's done. We have one
Yes.
chat. It's thank you. So then maybe I will begin by asking a question. I mean, which is concerning the tetrachromy. I mean, the 4 colors.
Right.
I mean, do you think it's something? I mean, we theoretically learned that. I mean, the Greeks were painting with the tetrachromy from archaic classic period. What do you think about that? I mean, do you think that it was really something very usual and it was then abandoned in the Hellenistic period, or is it a basic way of painting? I mean, what is your expertise on that?
Well, I think it was short-lived. It stops in the Hellenistic period. It only exists in the 4th century, and it must be some kind of fashion that they practice, and then the following generation doesn't want to do it anymore. So I think it's just if it's a fad.
So it was passing the fashion. Thank you. So I think that I see some question, and from Charles, how long did the tradition of tomb painting continue?
Well, in Macedonia, it stops around the middle of the 2nd century because the Romans occupied Macedonia in 168 BC, and then the Macedonian noblemen who had the money to make these tombs, they are killed or they are exiled, and they stop making them. So in Macedonia, we do not have painted tombs, but they continue elsewhere, for example, in Alexandria. And they go down to the Roman period. So painted tombs go on, except not in Macedonia.
So we are, we have thanks to you. Hazar Kaba from Sinop, Latife, from Germany. Any other questions?
Well, Latife and I are going to meet next week in a conference. There's going to be a Bulgarian conference, and Latife and I are going to speak there.
This is, it's nice that, actually Zoom is a good chance to meet. So we have also Elif. Has there
Yes.
been any analysis on the paints?
Yes, it has been, certainly. It's been analyzed a lot by Chariklia Brekullaki. She is a Greek archaeologist, and she's the specialist in the analysis of pigments. And she has written a book also about these paintings. It's not my specialty, but it has been done.
And also, Elif is continuing. Any parallels with paint on reliefs or paints elsewhere in the ancient world?
We have a lot of reliefs, maybe all reliefs were painted. We have found traces of paint on grave reliefs, and even in the Kerameikos cemetery in Athens. And these also have been analyzed. And also, I think, you want me to repeat the name of the scholar? Okay. The name is Brekullaki, Brecoulaki. She's a very well-known specialist in the analysis of pigments, and you can find her book in in any library when the libraries reopen.
Yes.
Anyhow, many times we see votive reliefs, especially in the 4th century, and they have empty spaces, especially above the heads of the figures, because these spaces were painted. And sometimes there is special photography that reveals various things above the heads. So you can take it that most reliefs were also painted.
We have Latife asking, how do the earliest tomb paintings date?
I'm sorry?
What is the date of the earliest tomb painting?
Well, this is very much disputed because, there is a big debate, especially about the tomb of Eurydice. This is the supposedly earliest. The tomb of Eurydice is supposedly the earliest Macedonian tomb with a barrel vault. And the tomb of Persephone is perhaps the earliest painted Macedonian tomb. And there is a big problem about their dates. I think they could be any time between 340 and 330. More or less, but maybe a little later, I don't know. There is a problem with these dates.
And some more questions? I'm looking to the chat. Actually, do you think that we should always make, or that we can find a solution by making a parallel between the grave paintings, tomb paintings, mosaics, wall paintings? Do you think there is always a connection between these three?
I think that mosaics are copies of paintings. I don't believe they originally thought of these compositions as mosaics. I would probably say that they are inspired by paintings. And then they become mosaics. Somebody adopts the theme and turns it into a mosaic, but originally I think they were all paintings. And it is very useful to compare mosaics with paintings and sometimes also with reliefs, as I have done in my talk.
And then you start from the, you start from the paintings?
You start from the paintings. But I think the paintings of Macedonia, again, they're not the originals. The tombs are not the most important place where you put these paintings. The paintings are usually in palaces or stores or temples. So even the tomb paintings are I think influenced or inspired by paintings in other locations.
And then there is a long debated question about what is the name in English? I mean, the book with some drawings. I mean, I forget the name exactly. I mean, the draft books which are circulating, because I mean, how to have the same theme from one place to the other place, which is very far away.
Yes, but I would say that this circulated within a specific workshops. So I think the workshop that used these prototypes, they traveled and used them again somewhere else. But I don't believe that they sold them to another workshop.
But you agree with the idea that there are some sketchbooks?
Yes, yes, I certainly agree. Yes.
Because this has very much been, it has been very much debated. So we have a question also from Charles. Are these many visual references to Orphic and Eleusinian mysteries exceptional from Macedonia?
There are many vase paintings from Athens and South Italy that show Orpheus. In South Italian vase paintings, especially from Apulia, we have scenes of the underworld, and in the underworld you see Pluto and Persephone and Orpheus, who is playing his music. And I would say, of course, this is a reference to Orphic mysteries. And we have representations of Orpheus also in Attic vase paintings, except what we see there is the death of Orpheus, who is killed by Maenads. And I don't think that this is so much related to the mysteries. But Orpheus is represented in many different ways. Yes, we do see visual allusions to the Orphic mysteries.
We have another question from Kate Clove. Have any chariots been excavated, and how do these compare with chariots in the paintings?
I'm sorry, excavated what?
Chariots.
Oh, chariots. I don't think we have any classical chariots. The chariots we have are Roman and Etruscan. So chariots of the classical period we don't have. And we compare the chariots in the paintings to relief chariots. We have chariots on like the Parthenon frieze. They are relief chariots. We can compare them to that, but we don't have real chariots until the Roman period. We have found Roman chariots in Greece, in Thrace, in Italy, and the Etruscan chariots in Italy. But they're much later than the Macedonian tombs.
So some more questions. And you were mentioning that in the tomb of Persephone, yes, I mean it was, I mean the artist was a very exceptional artist.
Yes.
In the other tombs, other other paintings, can you differentiate some artists? I mean, are there some specific artists that you find again from one tomb to the other tomb, or there is no possibility to find the different hands?
Actually, this question has been asked by other specialists who work on Macedonian painting, and there is no workshop. Every painting is different, and the technique is the same, and this technique is egg tempera. We don't have a fresco technique, except in the Persephone tomb, where part of the technique is fresco, and it's very unusual. That is why I think it is a good idea to associate that with Nicomachos, because Nicomachos of Athens did use some fresco technique. Anyhow, I think we all agree that we don't have workshops, organized workshops. In my personal opinion, each tomb is painted by someone who came from somewhere else, painted this particular tomb and left. We cannot associate styles between tombs. They are not the same. They are all different. And we don't have that many paintings. There are not many tombs are painted. We don't have figural scenes. So I wouldn't say that we have workshops or similar styles. They're all very different.
Thank you. So, do we have some? Yes, we have one for Hiranur Gültekin. So, who is not an archaeologist, and he's sorry if it is meaningless, but I'm sure it will be interesting for him in any case. Is there any reuse of these graves? Can we know if paintings made when they build it or later?
Yes, there is reuse, certainly. There is reuse, and I think the most famous is the tomb Casta in Amphipolis, which I'm pretty sure was reused. Originally, it was a Hellenistic tomb, and then the Romans reused it. But that is not a painted tomb. It's not painted. We have a mosaic, but we don't have paintings. Anyhow, this is a tomb that was reused. Another tomb that was reused is in Calydon. That is not in Macedonia. It's in Etrulia, but it is a Macedonian style tomb, and that was reused. It was a 2nd century original tomb, and then it was reused by the Romans. So again, we have evidence of reuse. And also we have tombs with graffiti. They were opened, and someone walked in there and wrote names which are Roman, because one of these tombs has the name Geta, which is of course the name of the Roman emperor, or a name used in the 3rd century AD. And finally, there is some evidence of the tombs were used for many years by the families, because the Judgement tomb, the big one with the which looks like a gateway, this was repaired. There were problems with the facade, and clearly it was repainted and repaired in the Hellenistic period. So it was open and visible for who knows how many years.
Thank you. So, any other questions? So, Shavdar is thanking you as well in the
Oh,
chat.
yes. And I will see him too in the Bulgarian conference. It's a small world, very small
yes,
world.
Yes, the meeting place of this conference. So if we don't have any more questions, then I mean, we thank you very much. I mean, Olga, for your time and for this presentation. We hope that we shall have the chance to listen to you, I mean, in person, I mean, in the future life, I mean, in the life after COVID.
After COVID.
Hopefully. So for now, thank you very much. Thank you very much to you. Thank you very much to everyone who came here. So it's actually our last presentation of the semester. We shall have a symposium, a roundtable, international roundtable on the 13th, 14th, 15th of June. But it will be about amphoras of Black Sea, so a completely different topic. Otherwise, I mean, all our lectures will be resumed in September, hopefully more freely. So thank you very much to all, and thank you, Olga. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.